Hello, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of Khanversation. I have with me two extraordinary people of religion and faith. I have with me Reverend Gregory Jones, the chief pastor of the Westminster Presbyterian Church in Wilmington. And I also have with me Rabbi Douglas Krantz, who is now retired in Delaware, but he was for many decades the rabbi for the Bani Israel community in Armonk, New York. He's originally from California, but we are fortunate that he chose to retire on the East Coast, even though all his children apparently live and work on the West Coast. Today, we are going to talk about something very serious and very critical to both America's domestic policy as well as America's foreign policy, which is America's role in the Middle East. These two gentlemen who are deeply connected to their faiths, who minister to their communities, have also for a long time engaged in what you could call as public diplomacy or individual diplomacy or faith-based diplomacy in order to promote peace between the Arab-Israeli factions. For decades, they have tried to push the two-state solution to get parties in the Middle East as well as parties here in the United States to acknowledge that this is possibly the only solution to this conflict. America continues to support Israel very strongly, even though Israel now is a nuclear power and one of the richest countries in the world, or at least in that region. It is economically very vibrant, it's technologically very advanced, and the Palestinians continue to suffer. And in the last 20, 30 years, Israel continues to expand its settlements in the areas that it occupies in West Bank and Gaza. As a result of that, the space available for a possible Palestinian state is on every day reducing and diminishing. And with that, the prospects for enduring peace, peace based on justice and equality, is also diminishing in the Middle East. And these two gentlemen have worked very hard. One aspect of this struggle is public opinion in America, which for various reasons, because of powerful pro-Israeli lobbies and Christian Zionism, continues to push policies which have not resulted in an enduring peace in the Middle East. And these two gentlemen have been trying to essentially go against that tide. In their communities, they have worked very hard to make peace an important goal. They continue to lobby the government, and they continue to inform and educate whoever they can about the importance of the United States' role in the Middle East and the importance of ordinary Americans' role in trying to bring about peace in the Middle East. So with that background, I want to welcome to Khanversations, both of you gentlemen. We will start by talking about your faith commitments. So I'm going to start first with Reverend Jones, and I will ask you, Gregory Jones, tell us a little bit about the faith-based convictions that have also made you a freelance diplomat, so to speak.
Well, as someone who considers himself a follower of Jesus, I seek to live my life according to his teachings and also the teachings of the prophets. Jesus was very influenced by the prophets, particularly Isaiah. And so what Jesus and the prophets are always calling for is some sort of equality and justice for all people, and also to be compassionate to all people. You may see the first passage there. What all Christians see as sort of a baseline is something that all religions, all world religions, have something similar to the golden rule. Do to others what you would want them to do to you, or don't do to others what you would not want done to you. All the world religions have something like that. It's about basic fairness. Treat others the way you want to be treated. And so we start there. I've also have this passage that's very meaningful to me. It's about the beginning of the ministry of Jesus. Before he had really gone very far, he went back to his hometown and he preached what we know of as his first sermon. That was in his hometown of Nazareth. And when he stood up to read, he had prepared to have the scroll of Isaiah handed to him. And he read this passage, which I think is the mission statement of Jesus. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord. And that really, in many ways, spells out one of the reasons, or chief reason, why I am so involved in trying to help with human rights efforts to find equality and justice for all people and security for all people. It's because Jesus felt anointed to bring good news to the poor, so we care about people who are poor. And so our church is very involved in ministries dealing with poverty and homelessness. And then recovery of sight to the blind, not simply literally opening the eyes of someone who cannot see, but it's figurative as well, opening the eyes of people who seem to be blind to what's really happening in front of them or going on in the world. And then, of course, to let the oppressed go free. There are many people in our world who are oppressed. And of course, the situation with the Palestinians comes to mind very quickly. And so that also fuels my interest and concern, and frankly, my calling to try to help people understand what's really going on. The passage before me now comes from the end of the Gospel of Matthew. These are all key passages, it seems to me, for anyone who follows Jesus. And to set this up, the idea here is that at the end of time, people in the first century often thought at the end of time there'll be this reckoning, dividing people from the good and the bad. And the Gospel of Matthew refers to that as the good people being the sheep, the bad people being the goats, and the person is like a shepherd separating the sheep from the goats. And the king says, for those at the right hand, you're going to be blessed. You're going to enter my kingdom because I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty. You gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, what we would think of as an alien, a foreigner, and you welcomed me. I was naked and you gave me clothing, someone who's very, very poor. I was sick and you took care of me. I was in prison and you visited me. And it's interesting in the passage, the people who are the righteous ones, the sheep, they are sort of dumbfounded by this. And they say, well, Lord, when did we see you hungry? When did we see you thirsty? When were you a stranger? When did you need clothing? When did we visit you? And the king says, whenever you did this to one of the least of these, you did it to me. In other words, when we touch the hearts and lives of others with compassion and fairness, justice, equality, we actually touch the heart of God.
When I listen to these passages, a thought appeared to me: is there some secret hidden Bible that you have which has these passages, and it is missing from the Bible that a lot of people who run our foreign policy watch? You know, these values are clearly available to all Christians. How come they are not as moved by this to help the poor, the marginalized? Even right now with the coronavirus stimulus, we are struggling to motivate the government to help the poor. They first move to help the corporations. So while we are so proud to be a Christian nation, sometimes we don't seem to follow Christian values.
No, I don't think many people do. Right. Of course, any interpreter of Scripture will find different parts of Scripture. And it seems to me that some people want to try to simply lift up those passages which have to do with a person's individual beliefs, which somehow lets them off the hook from these commands of Jesus to actually go and care for people And of course, the people we're to care for are the people on the bottom rungs of the ladder. It's interesting. I always like to point out to people in that passage from Matthew that when Jesus separates the people from between the sheep and the goats, he never mentions belief as one of those important criteria. He doesn't say, you're in the kingdom because you believed in me. He says, you're in the kingdom because you fed people who were hungry. You cared for people who were being oppressed. You welcomed the stranger. That's the criteria.
That's very interesting. I want to bring Douglas into the conversation. I mean, this issue of Arab-Israeli conflict probably is something that the Jewish community probably lives through every day, and it also serves to divide the community. It also serves to unite the community. It gives them a political purpose in many ways, at least in the United States, and perhaps also a spiritual purpose. So share with us as to what values in your faith prompted you to also engage in politics, both at home and abroad, and also become a diplomat for peace, Rabbi Krantz.
Well, first of all, I want to tell my colleague Reverend Jones that he sounds a lot like a rabbi to me, and that there's a lot of rabbinic in what Jesus had to say.
No question.
And there is no question about that. But I think it's important to state that obvious reality because it's what brings us together. I also want to make another point that I think is important. The three of us together are liberal religionists, and we tend to have more in common than those who are illiberal religionists, no matter what their religion, those who are fundamentalists in any religion, either Orthodox Jews or even to a certain extent evangelical Christians. So I just think it's important to sort of state that. And I, before I get to some of this, my first year of rabbinic school was spent in Israel, in Jerusalem, from 1970, 1971, that academic year. And I remember falling in love with the Arab parts of Israel as much as the modern Jewish parts. And I even then believed that there should be some kind of a state for Palestinians. And the PLO was then in charge, and I was a student. I didn't have any connection with them, but I felt that for a long time because really of some of the texts that I want to move to in a second. If we could put those up, and I'll explain how it fits in. Yeah, I want to call your attention to the number 19, and I'm going to work a little bit from the Hebrew side, and it says lo tateh mishpat, and it's translated "thou shalt not wrest judgment," and I don't think that's what it really means. It says "thou shalt not make incline justice." And it says that you shouldn't lo takir panim, you shouldn't recognize faces, and meaning give favoritism to your friends, and you shouldn't take a shoched, in Hebrew is a bribe. And then if you go down to 20, it says in the English is just right. Justice you shall pursue, chase after, not follow, chase after. Therefore you will live, meaning the pursuit of justice is what gives you life. And I think that's really important. I want to go to the next page if I can, and to not to the Amos one. If we could put the one up with the Leo Beck. Yeah, let's just go right to that one. Leo Beck was the chief rabbi of Berlin. And in the 1930s, and he was eventually arrested and taken to the concentration camps, a concentration camp, Bergen-Belsen, I think, and there he pushed a wheelbarrow and taught Talmud and Aristotle. And after the war, he wrote these words that have meant something to me, and I think it's important. a human spirit is not only is characterized not only by what it does, but no less by what it permits, what it forgives, and what it beholds in silence. And what he's really saying to us is that all that we do, all right, has great significance. And the one thing we can't remain is silent in the face of gross injustice. And I think that's when I say that I'm pro-Israel, pro-peace. Pro-peace is to be pro-Israel. The oppressor is a self-destructive reality. Anytime you deny somebody their rights or their freedom, you're not just destroying them, you're destroying yourself as well. And so I think that I think that that's what do not do unto others as you would not have them do unto you is really about. And I think it's elemental, it's fundamental. And so that's what I think religion, liberal religion, is about. And that's why I am so grateful to have two such extraordinary partners as the two of you and others here in Delaware.
Sometimes I feel, Rabbi Krantz, that we pick and choose the scriptures that suit our politics. For example, the Quran is also very clear on the subject of justice. Stand up for justice, even if you have to stand up against your own people. It could be your family members, it could be your community. And so justice is repeatedly emphasized as the second most important virtue after God consciousness in the Quran. And I find it very troubling that in modern times, rather than allowing religious values to shape who we are, we essentially have subordinated religion to our political identity and our political needs. So I want to come back to Reverend Jones and share with our audience that Reverend Jones is also the convener of Churches for Middle East Peace in Delaware, and they have been very active in trying to promote peace between the two parties. So if would you be kind enough to share with us what kind of programs and activities do you pursue?
Right. Churches for Middle East Peace is a national organization that's comprised of 29 different Christian bodies or groups. It includes the Roman Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, and a variety of Protestant denominations, Presbyterians, Episcopalians, Lutherans, Methodists, a number of different denominations. And so that's the national organization. We have a local chapter here in Delaware. And what we try to do, for me, number one, is informing people of what's truly going on in Israel-Palestine, because there's been a bias in our news for many decades about what is really happening there. The bias has been so strong that I find that sometimes when I just mention the word Palestinian, they oftentimes think that that's somehow a synonym for terrorist. They often don't realize that when I'm talking about Palestinians, I'm also talking about our brothers and sisters who are Christians, just like we are. And of course, many are also Muslims as well. So we try to open people's eyes. We try to educate and inform people. We also lobby our representatives. So we sit down and talk with Senators Carper and Coons and Lisa Blunt Rochester. And we talk to them and try to inform them and their foreign policy advisors of what's going on the ground there. Because things change a lot there. Sometimes some people are still dealing with very old news about the situation, and they need to be updated quickly. What's happened over the past couple of years has really changed a great deal, and now the Prime Minister of Israel is threatening to annex more and more property, basically to take more and more property away from Palestinians, which is only going to push things to a much more tense point and provoke problems there and provoke problems with their Arab neighbors, Jordan, Saudi Arabia. It's very dangerous what's going on there. And so we try to keep people informed about what is truly happening on the ground there. That's what we're about.
Douglas, you are also part of what is considered as the Israeli lobby in the US, even though most people deny that there is no such thing as Israeli lobby. But many commentators on this issue argue that the presence of a very powerful pro-Israel lobby has been instrumental in maintaining a bipartisan support for Israel, protecting it from international criticism to such extent that sometimes America even isolates itself, withdrawing from international organizations in order to protect Israel from criticism both at home and abroad. And people have pointed to AIPAC as one of the most powerful pro-Israel lobbies. But you have been working with another lobby called the J Street. You are a co-founder of that institution, which believes that the best way to bring about peace in the Middle East is to push the two-state agenda. Could you tell us a little bit more about the J Street and your work with J Street?
Sure, I'm delighted. I want to go back a little bit and just say a word about AIPAC, the so-called pro-Israel lobby. I don't know that it's really, I don't want to characterize it one way or the other, but except to say one thing about it, that it has given not just, it has taken positions on Israel that are no longer supported by the vast majority of the American Jewish community. And also, when the Rabin government came to power, and when Rabin came to Washington, AIPAC gave him a hard time, and the ministers I knew in that government a hard time. So it's a very entrenched lobby, and I just wanted to say that they give a lot of people a hard time, not just leftist groups, but also many Israelis. What I want to say about J Street is that many of us in the Jewish community started to advocate publicly for the first time in 1973. After that war, in the 1973 war, we formed a group called Brera, which means alternative. And we had an alternative approach to securing Israel's future, and it was a two-state solution. And the whole American Jewish community came after us rather dramatically. And even somebody from the Jewish Defense League came to the synagogue where I was an assistant rabbi to harass me. And what happened is I realized he was from the Jewish Defense League. I saw him as I walked into the building, and he asked me if Rabbi Krantz was here, and I said to him, "No, he's gone for the day," because I wanted to have nothing to do with him. But the point I'm trying to make is that we have been a divided Jewish community and a divided American community when it comes to Israeli-Palestinian issues. And I think the largest group in America supporting the Netanyahu government is not the American Jewish community, but the evangelical Christian community. And I wouldn't have really had to think about that a number of years ago. So I think that's important. What we in J Street are working on is the two-state solution. We believe that is in Israel's interest, militarily, politically, emotionally, in every way in terms of justice. And we started about 12 years ago, I think, or I'm not sure when, 2008. So yeah, 12 years ago. And we had 0 members of Congress taking money from our political action committee. We now have 146. So we've gone from 0 to, it's a small number, and we're not a 30-year-old organization, but we're making steady progress every year in moving in that. Right now, between now and July 1st, we're working as hard as we can to prevent this annexation. We have till then, and we're very active, and the more people that join us and work on that and contact their representatives, the better off we're going to be. I hope we can do it. It's something that I think is incredibly important. And at the same time, we need to continue to add members of both parties. Mostly they're Democrats, I think all but maybe one or something. But we need to add representatives and senators to the J Street name, and we're doing pretty well in that. It's slow, steady, hard work. So that's what we're up to.
You know, I don't know whether my viewers will notice that there is an empty chair in this conversation. There is no imam sitting with the two of you, because there is no mosque in Delaware. There are 8 to 10 mosques in Delaware, depending on how you count them. But none of them, or none of their imams have a dedicated Palestine-Israel program or Middle East peace program. And partly because the Muslim community has a very large home community, more than 50, 60 countries. The community itself is very diverse, and people are constantly concerned with problems overseas, Syria, Iraq, Turkey, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, there is a lot of pressure on Muslims in the US who try to engage on this particular issue. They are tainted with the same brush. And so if you are talking about, even to use the word Israeli occupation gets you into trouble. I've been kicked off many forums for saying something which is America's official foreign policy until very recently. So I want to ask you the tough question: is there such a thing as a two-state solution left? I mean, if you look at the maps of the Middle East, it is impossible to think of any coherent contiguous territory where the Palestinians could live, and the demographic pressures in that area are increasing as populations grow, and the land available for creating a Palestinian state diminishes every day. It appears that the more we delay these issues, the less likelihood of a two-state solution happening. I'll start with Greg and then come to Douglas. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I hold out the hope that there can be a two-state solution, but as you say, every day that begins to look like a position that's not going to make much sense unless large segments of Israeli settlements are closed and they are moved back to another area. I want peace in that country, and I want justice, and I want security for everyone. However that comes out, whether it's a two-state solution or a one-state solution, that's what I'm pushing for, is justice and security and human rights. Douglas would be better as far as specifics on how realistic it is to still consider that a two-state solution is really viable.
Yeah, I do have a few thoughts about it. I want to remind us all of relatively recent events, meaning the last 25 or 30 years, when Israel and Egypt signed a peace agreement. Settlements were dismantled and were totally destroyed. They weren't turned over, they were totally vacated, torn down, and the land was returned in the Sinai. When the Israelis and there were I mean, I'd driven through the Sinai when it was occupied by Israel, and so I was there in 1970 and it was very Israeli, and they were building settlements, and they took them down in exchange for peace, a real peace, and that some people say that that's not the best peace in the world. I call that peace treaty enduring after all of these years. And it has been good for both countries. When Israel vacated Gaza, they tore down the settlements. They left them. They didn't hold on to them. So there's Israeli precedence for abandoning settlements and turning that land back to the people. So I don't know why that was possible in 2 other instances and wouldn't be possible again. All right. So
isn't there a biblical significance to the land in West Bank as opposed to Sinai and Gaza?
Sinai has some real significance for the Jewish people. I mean, it's Sinai, was where we were liberated. It's where we got the law. I mean, Mount Sinai is, I mean, I couldn't believe it when I saw it for the first time when I lived in Israel in 1971. And we spent weeks camping in the Sinai. And when I went to Egypt and I thought about the pyramids and the slaves, that's also important to the Jewish people. You know, I mean, it doesn't mean we have to own the land, but it doesn't mean, you know, that we have to have settlements there. So my sense is that all of these realities can be accomplished and should be accomplished and should be accomplishable. And I do think that when we talk about returning the West Bank and Gaza to Palestinians and to their own self-government, everybody has always used, including the Trump administration, land swaps. All right, and so I don't see that as a huge obstacle, because there's such good precedent for it over the years. So I do think that would be in everybody's best interest. I don't think that it's healthy for Israelis to occupy another people. I was in Hebron last year for the first time in about 30 or 40 years. And I saw settlers there, and I saw what they're doing to themselves, taking over the historic Arab marketplace in Hebron, that great ancient city. From Genesis, we know of that city, and closing up the shops and welding them shut from the inside so that they could occupy marketplaces that were owned by Arabs that still are. Do you think that's healthy for Israelis? It's not. It's self-destructive. It's the most dangerous kind of behavior I can imagine. And when we were there, we were menaced by a heavily armed settler.
What do you mean by self-destructive for Israelis?
If I come into your house, Dr. Khan, and I take over your house and I lock you out of it.
I'm homeless.
Yes. Yes. Or if I take away your office at the university, all right, and I occupy it, that's self-destructive behavior. I mean, you know, it's like stealing a car. I mean, it's theft. I mean, you know.
So you're talking about self-destruction.
Thou shalt not steal isn't just about the loss of property. It's about what it does to the person who does the stealing.
So it's not material self-destruction, but spiritual and moral self-destruction. That's
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I want to come to you, Greg. Isn't that also something that America is doing to itself, providing some kind of moral self-destruction by continuing to look the other way when such policies are made, making excuses for it, trying to rationalize it both domestically and internationally, and then also providing financial and military resources to protect this kind of policies which are morally self-destructive. Don't you think so?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think whenever we pursue injustice or unjust situations, yeah, I think it's absolutely morally destructive. That's when we start playing with what truth is and falsehoods and telling, creating the fake news. All of that is self-destructive because you take one step in lying and then it becomes easier to lie the next time. You act cruelly to somebody once, the second time it gets a bit easier. And I'm very concerned about the direction of our nation because of that, yes.
You know, when we engage with politicians, there is always two kinds of engagement. One is on the record and one is off the record. And on the record, their response usually is, oh, the Palestinians are indulging in terrorist activities. They're flying kites and trying to burn Israel down, while Israel is flying F-16s and bombing residential areas. And so Palestinian terrorism is the reason why all this is happening. And there is absolutely no official acknowledgement, at least in American discourses here, of expanding territories, of all the systematic human rights violations. To use the word apartheid, if you remember when Jimmy Carter used it, there was such hue and cry, but if you look at the ground realities, there is a clear separation of two people taking place, even in West Bank to some extent, and other parts of the world. So there is none of this acknowledgement, and it's just Palestinians and their terrorist activities which are responsible for this. And this narrative is dominant, not just from politicians, but to a large extent from the media. The media sometimes commits errors of omission by not covering many aspects of the conflict. It continues to allow this perception to persist. So how do groups like yours and J Street deal with this mass public opinion which has been generated over the last 30, 40 years in America?
Right. Well, one of the things that we've done at Westminster is that we've tried to open people's eyes, and we do it in a variety of ways. One way is that my wife and I take spiritual pilgrimages to Israel-Palestine, and we let people see what's actually happening there on the ground. We go into Bethlehem, and they see how the people are walled off. We've taken them into refugee camps and shown them, and they see how Palestinians are being treated. And usually after a week or 10 days, their eyes open and they begin to say, you know, how come I haven't heard this before? I think our media may be a little bit biased. And you're just like shaking your head. Well, yes. We bring speakers in. We've brought a variety of different, there are many great speakers. We brought some from the West Bank. Mitri Raheb, who is the pastor of a church there in Bethlehem, has been one of our speakers that we've brought here. There are also a number of really good films that have been produced over the past 10 years, and we've often bought these films and had nights where we've shown the films. I think of 5 Broken Cameras. I just can't even think of the names of all of them right now. But there are a number of good films, and there's a company called Just Vision who's produced many of those films. People typically have Jews and Christians and Muslims working together to try to get the real word out on what's happening there. So it's a big information campaign, trying to overcome all the propaganda that's often put out there.
Douglas?
Yeah, you know, we did a similar thing in New York in my synagogue. We had all kinds of people, and I remember, I think it was in 1988, which was quite a while ago, when there was a bit of a, shall we say, a little concern raised when my wife and I decided to invite Edward Said to come and speak at our temple, which he did, and so, you know, we had also many Israelis. Left Meretz party people, all of them. I was the chairman of board of Meretz USA when the Rabin government came into power. So we had all of those people. We had a lot of high hopes in those days, and we weren't able to realize them. So I think that it is an education process, and I think that churches and synagogues and mosques all need to be involved in those processes. We also invited a settler to come, and it was a nightmare for him. But because there's very little support for the settler community in the liberal Jewish community, and so but my point is that synagogues, mosques, churches are places where people come together, and you can help mold opinions and need to, you know, you know, it's, you know, if you own a slave, all right, your humanity is diminished by that very reality. If you occupy another human person's property, all right, your humanity is diminished.
You know, we are seeing significant trends towards change in America. We have had a presidential candidate like Bernie Sanders, who has probably departed from tradition and spoken critically of Israel during the campaign itself. Often political campaigns are the reason why people are supposedly either silent or pro-Israel, but right now you see Bernie Sanders' campaign I mean, he's not one, but he did raise the issue. We also see a lot of young American Jews talking about the two-state solution, or about justice, or being critical of America's policies in the area. Recently, I invited Peter Boehner to come and speak at the University of Delaware as part of this same lecture series. And he also, made some very powerful arguments, which are anchored in Jewish ethical thought. And so there's an internal critique emerging from the Jewish community, and not necessarily just from the liberal side of it also, but probably from the middle of the community. So there is change, but yet we see that the situation on the ground there is far more dismal than it has ever been. When I look at the situation there, I feel less hopeful of any possible peace. The other thing that is happening globally is that there are so many crises now in the Arab world. You look at Syria, look at Iraq, look at Yemen, and then crises like the coronavirus, pandemic, etc., that the focus of the global media and global attention often has moved away from the Arab-Israeli conflict, which used to be central. So it is quite possible that injustice may prevail because people are just not being able to focus on this issue. What do you see, Douglas? Then I'll come back to Greg again.
I want to raise an additional issue with you. What I see is that it is harder to focus on that these days than it was 10, 12 years ago. But I also want to say something a little critical of Palestinians. And I've shared this thought with my closest Palestinian friends. And that is that the Palestinians have lacked successful leadership. They just haven't had very successful leaders, and the truth is, I felt in the end lied to by Yasser Arafat. I mean, I didn't feel he was honest with me when the times I met with him, and it was just one-on-one, just the two of us, and then other times with other people. So I think it's important to say that we missed a huge opportunity in the 90s. We really did. And getting that back has been much harder than I ever would have imagined it could be.
I mean, the leadership problem in not just the Palestinian world, but the Arab world is spectacular, to say the least. And there is no doubt that there has been no legitimate leader since the death of Arafat. While Arafat was alive, at least he could have moved things forward. He had enough cachet in his own community as well as in the broader Arab world to take significant decisions. But I don't think Mahmoud Abbas can probably even decide whether to go with Zoom or Microsoft meetings. He has no legitimacy there. He has no charisma, and he has no victories that people, and he doesn't seem to enjoy international respect at all. So yes, I think that is also one of the problems, the absence of coherent and purposeful and meaningful leadership, not just in the case of the Palestinians, but also in the Arab world. The new king of Jordan, Abdullah, did try. I mean, he's very articulate and he could have played a major role, but he has not, like his father used to play in these issues. So what do you have to say, Greg?
Well, I think I agree completely with both of you, but I think another piece of it has been that there's been this strong move to the right, this idea of nationalism that's actually sweeping the globe right now. We've seen it in many countries, and I think that's another factor working against us. But as you said in the beginning, a big part of it is there's so many different crises around the world that people are focused so many different places. And of course, right now, whole world's totally focused on this pandemic.
Yes, I want to ask one more question before I wind up. And this question is that what are you going to do next in your efforts to continue to educate the community about this crisis, educate the community of the suffering of especially Palestinians in Gaza, as the quality of life is completely becoming unbearable. It's unbearable to just read reports about it. I don't know how they live like that. And they are not safe, children die, etc. And how do your institutions, your efforts, what is the next thing that you plan to do? Start with Greg and with Douglas.
Well, we will continue with Delaware Churches for Middle East Peace, continuing to inform and educate and to lobby our representatives. We'll continue to do that. We also, something I haven't mentioned yet, is one of our efforts is called Peace Drums, where we have initially my congregation and a Jewish congregation here in town got together and started working on how we could work for peace in the Middle East, and we decided to use music as the mechanism, and we recruited children from schools there, middle school, Jews, Christians, Muslims, taught them how to play steel drums together, and we're using them to get to know one another. They learn to make music with one another. Then as they work together, their parents get to know each other. So we've got Jews, Christians, and Muslims getting to know each other better in Israel-Palestine. And then we have that group that they become so good is that they began touring. And so they're a model for positive movement of reconciliation, moving toward peace, saying we can live together. So that's one of the major efforts that we've made, along with the education efforts and the lobbying efforts. And we'll continue to take people there to the land so that they can see for themselves what's really going on.
What about you, Douglas?
I want to say a word about Gaza. When my wife and I first went to Israel together, we because of our friendship with Edward Said, we were introduced to Faisal Husseini, and we had asked to go visit the West Bank, and instead he sent us to Gaza, and we got lost in Gaza in those days and wandered into a pharmacy, and the pharmacist helped us and got us to the right people that we were supposed to meet. But we sent him a thank you note, and he wrote back to us, and we started a correspondence. And a few years later, we were back in Israel. We were invited to their home, and we stayed in their home on many, many occasions over the years. And I have a real soft spot in my heart for Gaza and what's going on there, and an incredible, almost 40-year relationship with this family in Gaza. And I talk to them all the time. And I share that with you because it's all about relationships. And when you build these kinds of walls and you separate people, what you do is you destroy the possibility for peace. And also you destroy and you take away an aspect of your own life, which is to come to know people of a different culture, to be enriched by the nature of their experiences, whether it be their food, their language, their poetry, their music. All of that is by building these barriers. All of that is missing from the human dimension of life, and it would be as if somehow none of us talk because you're a Muslim, you're a Christian, and I'm a Jew. All right, I mean you too enrich my life, and so does peace. And that's really important to remember.
It's really important. Relationships, I think, really are key in the thing. That's what we're trying to build, like with the Peace Drum piece, is we're trying to get relationships built there. We also do it here in our local community as the three of us work together, and as our congregation works with the Islamic Society of Delaware and the Mosque of Jesus, Son of Mary. We get to know each other. Great difficulties in this country have come up when people have formed their groups either to become anti-Muslim or anti-Semitic. And then you get people together and get to know each other, and you break down those terrible barriers. And of course, one of the things about all religious backgrounds is to get together, get to know each other, and find people who are striving for the same basic, deep values that our religions espouse.
Right. I consider it an honor to work with both of you. You are standing up for justice, especially in a matter where it is very contentious in this country. And I know you receive a lot of criticism from broader Christian groups and broader Jewish groups. And I'm very familiar with the things that are said about Douglas from those who probably do not share his politics, but are members of the American Jewish community a bit more on his right. But there's something else I think that I would recommend that you also do is to start building a younger community in Delaware and impart that spirit for justice, that spirit for peace that I can sense in both of you, so that this work continues into the future. Whenever I visit the events that we do, there are lots of people there, but they're all older people, and I think it's important to convey this message to younger Americans. And we notice on campuses and elsewhere that younger Americans are getting very active about it. But I think the wisdom and the faith-based depth that both of you bring to this issue is extremely valuable. And as long as the world sees this conflict as partially religious conflict rather than just territorial or nationalistic, it is important that religious values and religious voices play an important role. So I want to thank both of you for taking so much of your time out today on a Sunday to talk to me. And I'm sure that my listeners and my students will definitely be inspired by both of you. And I hope it also encourages them to become ambassadors for peace and justice. Thank you very much to both of you.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Really appreciate it. Good to see you both.
It was great to be with both of you.